The steel collar around Kreshna's neck had been cold for 3 years, but the morning Isaac Fenton found her shivering in his barn. It was the warmth of his kitchen fire that made her realize she had forgotten what kindness looked like. She had escaped 2 days prior, stumbling through the frozen forest with stolen rags wrapped around her feet and nothing but animal cunning keeping her alive. The slavers who had taken her from her clan's hunting grounds when she was barely 17 had taught her many things: how to endure pain without crying out, how to make herself small and silent, how to survive on scraps and stolen moments of sleep. They had not taught her how to trust again. And when Isaac discovered her curled in the hay beside his milk cow, her first instinct was to bare her tusks and prepare to fight or die. Instead, the man had simply set down his bucket, raised his empty hands, and said in a voice rough with early morning cold, "You are safe here. I will not hurt you." She had heard those words before, always followed by cruelty. But Isaac Fenton did not move closer. He did not shout or reach for a weapon. He simply waited, his breath fogging in the winter air, until her shaking became so violent that pride no longer mattered more than survival. "Please," she had whispered, the first word she had spoken aloud in months that was not a scream or a plea for mercy to deaf ears. Now she sat at his kitchen table, a rough-hewn thing of oak that had probably served his family for generations, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of lavender and wood smoke. Isaac moved around the small kitchen with the easy competence of a man who had lived alone for some time, setting a kettle to boil and slicing thick pieces of bread from a brown loaf. He did not stare at her green skin, or the way her tusks protruded slightly over her lower lip. He did not comment on the scars that covered her arms or the hollow look in her amber eyes. "The bread is fresh from yesterday," he said, placing a plate before her. "There is butter in the crock, and I have some honey if you prefer sweet to savory." Kreshna stared at the food as though it might vanish if she blinked. Her hands, still bearing the rope burns from her shackles, trembled as she reached for the bread. She had learned to eat quickly in captivity, to swallow without tasting because meals were always interrupted or stolen by those stronger or crueler. But something about the quiet kitchen, the crackling fire, and Isaac's deliberate patience made her pause. She took a small bite, then another. The bread was soft and warm, and when Isaac placed a cup of tea beside her plate, she wrapped both hands around it and felt the heat seep into her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar to her own ears. Isaac nodded and took a seat across from her, though he positioned his chair at an angle that did not force direct eye contact. "My name is Isaac Fenton. I have lived on this homestead for 5 years since I returned from the border wars. You are welcome to stay as long as you need, and I will ask nothing of you in return." She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately that it physically hurt, a sharp ache beneath her breastbone. But 3 years of captivity had carved away the soft parts of her that could accept generosity without suspicion. "Why?" she asked, meeting his gaze for the first time. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains where she had been born. There was sadness in them, old and settled, but no malice. "Because you needed help and I could provide it," Isaac said simply. "I know what it is to be far from home and afraid. I would not wish that on anyone, regardless of their heritage." Kreshna searched his face for deception, for the cruel twist of lips that always preceded pain, but found none. Isaac simply returned to his own breakfast, eating slowly and without urgency, as though sharing his table with a half-starved orc woman was the most natural thing in the world. The kitchen was small but well kept, with herbs hanging from the rafters and copper pots gleaming on their hooks. A window looked out over snow-covered fields where the morning sun was just beginning to paint the world in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful in a way that made Kreshna's chest tighten, because she had forgotten that beauty existed outside of memory. "I should leave," she said, though she made no move to rise. "If anyone discovers I am here, they will come for me. The slavers who held me will not give up their property easily." Property. The word tasted like ash, but it was what she had been for 3 years. Not a person, not even really a thing with value beyond what labor could be extracted from her body. Isaac's jaw tightened, the first real emotion he had shown. "You are not property. You are a free person, and anyone who says otherwise will have to answer to me." "You do not know what they are capable of," Kreshna said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They are cruel men with cruel methods, and they do not accept loss." "I spent 5 years fighting in the border wars," Isaac replied, his tone even but firm. "I know cruelty. I also know that sometimes you have to stand against it, or lose the part of yourself that makes life worth living." He stood and moved to the window, looking out over his land with an expression Kreshna could not quite read. "I came back from the war with nightmares and a leg that aches when it rains. I bought this homestead because I wanted peace, but peace without justice is just another word for cowardice. You can stay here. I will not turn you away, and I will not let anyone take you against your will." Kreshna felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the armor she had built around her heart. She did not cry, because tears had been beaten out of her long ago, but her breath came sharp and painful. "I do not even remember how to be free," she admitted. Isaac turned back to her, and his expression was gentle. "Then we will figure it out together, one day at a time." The first few days passed in a haze of sleep and slow recovery. Isaac gave Kreshna the small bedroom at the back of the house, the one with a window that looked out over the barn and chicken coop. The bed was soft, the blankets heavy and warm, and for the first night, she simply lay awake and stared at the ceiling, unable to believe that no one would burst through the door to drag her back to the cold stone cell where she had spent so many nights. When she finally slept, the nightmares came as they always did. She woke gasping, her heart pounding, to find pale morning light filtering through the curtains and the smell of cooking food drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment, she could not remember where she was, and panic seized her with familiar claws. Then she heard Isaac moving around below, the soft clink of dishes and the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to his animals, and reality settled back into place. She was safe, at least for now. Kreshna rose slowly, her body stiff and aching from years of hard labor and poor treatment. The mirror above the wash basin showed her a stranger, a young orc woman with skin the color of spring moss, amber eyes that had seen too much, and tusks that had been filed down by slavers who thought them too threatening. Her hair, once thick and dark as a raven's wing, hung in ragged chunks where it had been cut short to prevent her from using it as a weapon or a means of escape. She looked like a ghost of herself, and for a moment, the grief was so overwhelming that she had to grip the edge of the basin to remain standing. A soft knock at the door pulled her back from the edge. "I have left some clothes outside the door," Isaac called. "They belong to my mother. She passed 5 years ago, but I kept some of her things. They should fit you better than what you are wearing." Kreshna waited until his footsteps retreated before opening the door. A neat stack of clothing lay on the floor: woolen trousers, a linen shirt, a thick sweater, and undergarments that were worn but clean. She dressed slowly, her fingers clumsy with the unfamiliar buttons and laces. The clothes were too large in some places and too small in others, but they were warm and whole, and when she caught her reflection again, she looked almost like a real person. When she descended the narrow stairs to the kitchen, Isaac was setting breakfast on the table. He glanced up, nodded approval, and gestured to the chair she had claimed the day before. "I thought we could discuss plans today," he said as she sat. "If you intend to stay for a while, it would help to know what you need. Medical attention, supplies for travel if you decide to move on, or simply time to rest and recover." Kreshna accepted a plate of eggs and fried potatoes, still marveling at the casual abundance. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "My clan was in the Iron Peak Mountains, 3 weeks' travel north of here. I do not know if they still live in the same territory, or if they would even accept me back after what has been done to me." "What do you mean?" Isaac asked carefully. "Orcs value strength," Kreshna said, pushing food around her plate. "I was taken because I was weak, careless. I allowed myself to be captured, and for 3 years I survived instead of dying with honor. My people may see me as tainted, broken. They may not want a reminder of weakness in their midst." Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "In the war, I saw men break under torture and imprisonment. Some of my closest friends were captured and held for months before we could rescue them. When they came back, they were different, quieter, more cautious. But we never thought them weak. We thought them survivors, and we honored the strength it took to endure what they had endured." "Humans and orcs are not the same," Kreshna said, but there was less conviction in her voice than before. "Perhaps not," Isaac agreed. "But suffering is suffering, and survival is survival. I think strength comes in many forms, and the fact that you escaped, that you kept yourself alive long enough to find freedom, speaks to a will that could not be broken no matter what they did to you." Kreshna felt that crack in her armor widen, and she had to look away before the emotion could show on her face. "You are kind to say so." "I am honest to say so," Isaac corrected gently. "There is a difference." They ate in comfortable silence after that, and when the meal was finished, Isaac pushed back from the table and began clearing dishes. Kreshna rose to help, but he waved her back to her seat. "You are still recovering. Rest." "I am not an invalid," Kreshna said, more sharply than she intended. "I do not wish to be a burden." Isaac paused, hands full of plates, and turned to look at her. "You are not a burden, you are a guest, but if it would make you feel better to help, I will not refuse the assistance. I am not so proud as to turn down an extra pair of hands, especially with spring planting coming soon." Kreshna stood and took half the dishes from him, carrying them to the basin by the window. Together, they washed and dried in silence, falling into an easy rhythm that felt almost natural. When the work was done, Isaac pulled on a heavy coat and gloves. "I need to check the animals and mend a section of fence that came down in the last storm. You are welcome to come with me, or to stay inside where it is warm." Kreshna considered. The house was comfortable, but she had spent too much time in enclosed spaces, and the thought of walls closing in made her skin crawl. "I will come." Isaac nodded and handed her a coat that had also belonged to his mother. It was thick and lined with fur, and when Kreshna pulled it on, she felt warmer than she had in years. Outside, the world was a study in white and blue, the snow glittering under a clear sky and the air so cold it burned her lungs. Kreshna followed Isaac to the barn, where 3 goats, 2 cows, and a fat pony greeted them with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Isaac moved among them with practiced ease, checking hooves and coats, distributing hay and fresh water. "The pony is called Clover," he said, scratching behind the animal's ears. "She is old and stubborn, but she has a good heart. The cows are Daisy and Buttercup, which I know are ridiculous names, but they came with them when I bought the homestead. The goats are simply referred to as the Trouble Trio, because they are always escaping or eating something they should not." Kreshna found herself almost smiling, a sensation so foreign that it felt like moving a muscle that had atrophied. You speak to them as though they are friends. They are the best listeners I have ever met, Isaac said with a shrug. They do not argue, they do not judge, and they are always happy to see me. That is more than I can say for most people I have known. You are alone out here, Kreshna observed. Do you not have family? Friends in the nearby town. Isaac's expression clouded slightly. My parents are both gone. My father died when I was young, and my mother passed while I was at war. I have a brother, but he moved to the coast to work as a fisherman. We exchange letters occasionally, but we are not close. As for the town, I visit when I need supplies, but I am not much for socializing. The war made me too aware of how quickly things can turn violent, and I prefer the quiet of the homestead. Kreshna understood that sentiment more than she could express. Quiet is a luxury, she said softly. It is, Isaac agreed. One I do not take for granted. They worked together through the morning, Isaac showing Kreshna how to feed the animals and where he kept the tools. She was strong despite her ordeal, her orc heritage giving her a natural resilience that even 3 years of captivity had not fully eroded. When they moved to the damaged fence, she held posts steady while Isaac hammered them into the frozen ground, and she carried tools without complaint. By midday, they were both tired and cold, but the work was done. Isaac led the way back to the house, where he built up the fire and set soup to warm on the stove. Kreshna sank into a chair by the hearth, feeling the pleasant ache of muscles used properly for the first time in years. You are good at this, Isaac said, ladling soup into bowls. The farm work, I mean. Have you done it before? My clan were hunters and gatherers, Kreshna said. But we also tended herds of mountain sheep and grew root vegetables in the high valleys. I learned to work with my hands from the time I could walk. Then you will be a great help come spring, Isaac said, handing her a bowl. If you choose to stay, that is. I do not presume to know your mind. Kreshna accepted the soup, breathing in the rich smell of vegetables and herbs. I do not know my own mind anymore, she admitted. For 3 years I had no choices. Now that I have them again, I find myself uncertain of what I want. That is understandable, Isaac said, settling into the chair across from her. Take your time. There is no rush. They ate together, the firelight dancing across the walls and the wind howling softly outside. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Kreshna felt something close to peace. The days turned into weeks, and Kreshna found herself settling into the rhythm of life on Isaac's homestead. She woke with the sun, helped with the animals and the endless small tasks that kept a farm running, and spent the evenings by the fire with a book borrowed from Isaac's small collection, or simply listening to him talk about his plans for the spring planting. He was a good man, patient and kind in ways that constantly surprised her. He never pushed her to speak about her captivity, never asked questions that might open old wounds. Instead, he treated her as an equal, someone whose opinions mattered and whose presence was valued. Slowly, so slowly that she did not notice it happening until it had already begun, Kreshna started to relax. The tension that had lived in her shoulders for 3 years began to ease. She slept more deeply, the nightmares coming less frequently. She found herself laughing at Isaac's dry humor, the sound startling and strange at first, but gradually becoming more natural. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of repairing the chicken coop, Isaac pulled out a worn deck of cards. You know how to play rummy? He asked. Kreshna shook her head. We did not have cards in my clan. We played games with stones and bones. Then I will teach you, Isaac said, shuffling the deck with practiced ease. Fair warning, I am quite good, so do not be discouraged if you lose the first few rounds. Kreshna accepted the challenge, and for the next hour they played cards while the fire crackled and the wind howled outside. Isaac was indeed very good, but Kreshna was a quick learner, and by the end of the evening she had won 2 games to his 5. "You have a sharp mind," Isaac said, gathering the cards. "I will have to be more careful, or you will be beating me regularly by the end of the month." "I look forward to it," Kreshna replied, and realized with a small shock that she meant it. She was looking forward to something, anticipating a future that extended beyond simple survival. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. A month ago, she had been a slave, a piece of property to be used and discarded. Now she was a guest in a warm house, treated with respect and kindness by a man who asked nothing of her but her company. It was too good to be true, and yet it was true. And that terrified her almost as much as it comforted her. Winter began to loosen its grip as February turned to March. The snow melted in patches, revealing the dark earth beneath, and the animals grew restless with the promise of spring. Isaac began preparing for planting, sharpening tools and sorting seeds, and Kreshna helped where she could, learning the rhythms of human farming and finding them not so different from the work she had done in her youth. One afternoon, as they worked together in the barn, Isaac paused and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "I need to go into town tomorrow for supplies," he said. "I will be gone most of the day." "You are welcome to come with me, but I understand if you would prefer to stay here." Kreshna's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of being seen by other humans, of facing their stares and whispers, made her stomach clench with anxiety. But another part of her, the part that was slowly remembering how to be brave, wanted to prove that she could do this. "I will come," she said before she could change her mind. Isaac nodded slowly. "It may be difficult. Not everyone in town is as open-minded as I am. There may be stares or comments. If at any point you wish to leave, just tell me and we will go immediately." "I understand," Kreshna said, though her heart was already racing. The next morning dawned cold but clear, and they set out early in the wagon, Clover plodding steadily along the rutted road. The journey took 2 hours, and with each mile, Kreshna felt her anxiety grow. She sat stiffly beside Isaac, her hands clenched in her lap, trying to prepare herself for whatever might come. The town was small, just a handful of buildings clustered around a central square. A general store, a blacksmith, a tavern, and a church with a crooked steeple. As they rolled into the square, people stopped what they were doing to stare. Kreshna felt the weight of their gazes like physical things, heavy and judgmental. Isaac pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store and climbed down, then offered his hand to help Kreshna descend. She took it, grateful for the small gesture of support, and followed him into the store. The interior was dim and cluttered, shelves packed with goods of every description. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with a stern face and suspicious eyes. She looked up as they entered, and her expression hardened when she saw Kreshna. "Isaac Fenton," she said coolly. "I heard you had taken in a stray. I did not believe it until now." "Good morning, Mrs. Harrow," Isaac said, his tone polite but firm. "I need to purchase seed, flour, and salt. Also some lamp oil and soap if you have it." Mrs. Harrow did not move. "I do not serve orcs in my store. You know the rules." "Kreshna is with me, and she is my guest," Isaac said, his voice hardening. "If you refuse to serve me because of her presence, I will take my business to the next town, and I will make sure everyone knows why." Mrs. Harrow's eyes narrowed, but after a long moment she relented. "Fine, but she touches nothing and she stays where I can see her." Kreshna felt her face burn with shame and anger, but she kept her expression neutral. Isaac placed his order, and Mrs. Harrow filled it with exaggerated slowness, her gaze flicking to Kreshna every few seconds as though expecting her to lunge across the counter and attack. When the transaction was finally complete, Isaac paid and loaded the supplies into the wagon with Kreshna's help. As they worked, a group of men emerged from the tavern, their faces flushed with drink despite the early hour. "Well, well," one of them called, his voice slurred. "If it is not Isaac the orc lover, tell me, Fenton, does she warm your bed at night, or do you just like the company of monsters?" Isaac stiffened, but Kreshna placed a hand on his arm. "Ignore them," she said quietly. "They are not worth your anger." "They have no right to speak to you that way," Isaac said, his jaw tight. "They have every right," Kreshna replied. "In their eyes I am less than human. I have lived with that knowledge for 3 years. A few words will not break me now." But Isaac was not content to let it pass. He turned to face the men, his expression cold. "Kreshna is my guest and under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to me. If you have a problem with that, we can settle it now." The men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Isaac was not a large man, but there was something in his bearing, a quiet danger that spoke of experience with violence. After a moment, the leader of the group spat on the ground and turned away. "Not worth the trouble," he muttered, and his companions followed him back into the tavern. Isaac watched them go, then turned to Kreshna. "I am sorry. I should have known better than to bring you here." "You did nothing wrong," Kreshna said. "I chose to come. I needed to see for myself how the world would receive me." "And now you know," Isaac said quietly. "Now I know," Kreshna agreed. "But I also know that there are people like you who see beyond the surface. That is enough." They climbed back into the wagon and left the town behind, the supplies secured in the back. The journey home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they finally reached the homestead, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Isaac helped Kreshna down from the wagon, and for a moment they stood close together, their breath fogging in the cold air. "Thank you," Kreshna said softly, "for defending me, for seeing me as more than what others think I am." "You do not need to thank me for basic decency," Isaac replied, "but you are welcome all the same." That night, as Kreshna lay in bed, she thought about the way Isaac had stood up for her, the way he had been willing to fight for her dignity. It was a small thing, perhaps, but to her, it meant everything. For the first time since her capture, she felt like a person again, not just a survivor, but someone with value and worth. And that feeling, fragile and new, was more precious than anything else in the world. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it a flurry of activity. The fields needed to be plowed and planted, the garden tilled and seeded, and 100 other tasks that kept Isaac and Kreshna busy from dawn until dusk. They worked side by side, their movements synchronized by weeks of shared labor, and Kreshna found herself enjoying the work in a way she had not expected. There was something healing about putting her hands in the soil, about nurturing life instead of simply enduring. She planted seeds with care, watered them faithfully, and felt a quiet pride when the first green shoots pushed through the earth. Isaac noticed the change in her, the way she moved with more confidence, the way her smiles came more easily. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "You seem happier." Kreshna considered the statement. "I am learning to be myself again," she said. "Or perhaps I am learning to be a new version of myself. The girl I was before is gone, but the woman I am becoming is stronger." "You were always strong," Isaac said. "You simply lost sight of it for a while." Kreshna turned to look at him, studying his profile in the fading light. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense, his features too rough and weathered for that, but there was a kindness in his face that made him beautiful to her eyes. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly. Why did you take me in, risk your reputation, defend me against your own people?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "When I was at war, I saw things that broke something inside me. I saw men commit atrocities in the name of duty, saw innocents suffer because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I came back believing that the world was cruel and that there was no point in fighting against it." He paused, his expression distant. "But then I bought this homestead, and I started to build a life. I realized that I could choose to add to the cruelty, or I could choose to be a small point of light against it. When I found you in my barn, I saw someone who had suffered more than anyone should have to suffer, and I knew that if I turned you away, I would be no better than the men I fought against." Kreshna felt tears prick at her eyes, but she did not look away. "You saved my life, Isaac Fenton. Not just from death, but from losing myself entirely. I do not know how to repay that debt." "There is no debt," Isaac said, finally turning to meet her gaze. "You owe me nothing. Your presence here, your company, that is more than enough." Something shifted between them in that moment, a subtle change in the air that made Kreshna's heart race. She wanted to reach out, to close the small distance between them, but fear held her back. She had been hurt too much, too deeply, to trust the fragile hope that was blooming in her chest. Instead, she simply nodded and rose from her chair. "Good night, Isaac. Good night, Kreshna." As she climbed the stairs to her room, she could feel his gaze on her back, and she wondered if he felt the same pull that she did, the same tentative longing for something more than friendship. The weeks passed, and the seeds they had planted began to grow, transforming the fields into a patchwork of green. Kreshna spent her days tending the garden, feeding the animals, and helping Isaac with whatever tasks needed doing. She grew stronger, her body filling out from good food and honest labor, and her spirit began to heal in ways she had not thought possible. But as her health returned, so too did her awareness of Isaac as more than just a kind man who had given her shelter. She noticed the way his hands moved when he worked, strong and capable. She noticed the way he smiled when he thought no one was watching, a small, private expression that made her wonder what he was thinking. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, a softness in his eyes that made her breath catch. She tried to ignore the feelings, to bury them beneath the weight of practicality. She was an orc, and he was human. Their worlds were too different, the prejudice against their kind too deep, for anything between them to be possible. And yet, the feelings persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. One afternoon in late April, as they worked together to repair the roof of the chicken coop, a sudden storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering with alarming speed. Isaac looked up at the sky and swore softly. "We need to get inside. This is going to be a bad one." They barely made it to the house before the rain began, a torrential downpour that turned the world gray. Isaac built up the fire while Kreshna changed into dry clothes, and when she returned to the kitchen, he had set the kettle to boil. "That was close," he said, handing her a cup of tea. "Another minute and we would have been soaked through." Kreshna accepted the cup gratefully, her hands still cold from the sudden chill. They settled by the fire, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and the wind rattle the windows. It was almost cozy, the two of them tucked away while the storm raged outside. "Tell me about your clan," Isaac said after a while. "What were they like?" Kreshna was surprised by the question. Isaac rarely asked about her past, respecting her silence on the subject. But perhaps the intimacy of the moment had loosened his tongue, or perhaps he simply wanted to know her better. "They were strong and proud," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "We lived in the high valleys of the Iron Peak Mountains, where the air is thin and the winters are harsh. My father was a hunt leader and my mother was a weaver. I had 2 brothers and a sister, all older than me. Do you miss them? Isaac asked. Every day, Kreshna admitted. But I do not know if they still live or if they would welcome me back. 3 years is a long time and the world changes. If you wanted to find them, I would help you, Isaac said. We could travel north in the summer when the passes are clear. I have no ties to this place beyond my own choice to be here. If you need to go home, I will take you. Kreshna looked at him, her heart swelling with an emotion she was afraid to name. Why would you do that? This is your home, your livelihood. You would give that up for me. I would give up a great deal for you, Isaac said quietly, and the honesty in his voice stole her breath. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the drumming of rain. Kreshna felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against her chest, and before she could think better of it, she spoke. I do not want to leave, she said. This place, this life with you, it is more than I ever thought I would have again. I am afraid that if I go searching for my past, I will lose the present I have found. Isaac set down his cup and turned to face her fully. What are you saying, Kreshna? I am saying that I want to stay, she said, her voice trembling. Not as a guest, but as something more. I am saying that I care for you, Isaac Fenton, in ways that terrify me and give me hope in equal measure. Isaac's expression softened, and he reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm and gentle, and Kreshna felt tears spill down her cheeks. I care for you too, he said. I have for weeks now, but I did not know how to say it. I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated. You have been through so much, and I did not want to add to your burden. You are not a burden, Kreshna said fiercely. You are the best thing that has happened to me in longer than I can remember. You gave me back my life, and I want to spend it with you if you will have me. Isaac pulled her close, and Kreshna went willingly, burying her face against his shoulder and letting the tears come. He held her as she cried, his arms strong and steady, and when the storm of emotion finally passed, she looked up at him with a shaky smile. I am sorry, she said. I did not mean to fall apart like that. You have nothing to apologize for, Isaac said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You are allowed to feel, Kreshna. You are allowed to be vulnerable. It does not make you weak. She kissed him then, a tentative press of lips that quickly deepened into something more. Isaac responded with a tenderness that made her heart ache, his hands cradling her face as though she were something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Kreshna felt more alive than she had in years. Stay with me, Isaac said, his voice rough. Not as a guest, but as my partner. Help me build a life here, and I will spend every day making sure you know how much you are valued. Yes, Kreshna said, her smile bright and true. Yes, I will stay. The summer passed in a haze of work and quiet happiness. Kreshna and Isaac tended the farm together, harvesting the first crops and preserving them for the winter. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, their bond growing stronger with each passing week. But their happiness was not without challenges. Word of their relationship spread through the nearby town, and the reactions ranged from disapproval to outright hostility. Isaac received a letter from the town council warning him that his association with an orc was damaging his reputation, and advising him to reconsider. He burned the letter in the fire and never spoke of it again. Kreshna, for her part, struggled with guilt. She knew that her presence in Isaac's life made things harder for him, that he faced judgment and scorn because of her. She offered more than once to leave, to spare him the trouble, but Isaac refused to hear it. They do not get to decide who I love, he said firmly. That is my choice, and I choose you. I will always choose you. His words warmed her, but the guilt lingered. It was only when a late summer storm brought trouble to their door that things came to a head. They were finishing dinner when the sound of hooves and raised voices echoed from the yard. Isaac rose immediately, his expression tense, and moved to the door. Kreshna followed, her heart pounding. Outside, a group of 6 men sat astride horses, their faces hard and unfriendly. At their head was a man Kreshna recognized, Garrett Stone, one of the slavers who had held her captive. Her blood ran cold and she reached instinctively for Isaac's arm. "Well, well," Garrett said, his smile cruel. "So this is where my property ran off to. I have been searching for months, and here you are, playing house with a sympathizer." Isaac stepped forward, placing himself between Kreshna and the men. "She is not your property. She is a free woman, and she is under my protection. Leave now, or I will make you leave." Garrett laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You and what army, Fenton? You are 1 man and we are 6. Hand over the orc and we will forget this ever happened. Refuse and we will take her by force." "You will not touch her," Isaac said, his voice low and dangerous. "I am warning you, Stone. Turn around and leave, or you will regret it." "Big words for a crippled soldier," Garrett sneered. "Let us see if you can back them up." He dismounted, and his men followed suit, spreading out to surround the house. Kreshna felt panic rising in her chest, but Isaac remained calm, his hand moving to the rifle he had leaned against the doorframe. "Last chance," he said. Garrett drew a knife, his intent clear, and Isaac raised the rifle in one smooth motion, firing a shot that kicked up dirt at Garrett's feet. The slaver froze, his eyes wide with shock. "The next one goes through your knee," Isaac said. "After that I aim for center mass. Your choice." Garrett stared at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground. "This is not over, Fenton. You are making a mistake protecting that creature." "The only mistake I see is the one you are about to make if you do not leave," Isaac replied. Reluctantly, Garrett and his men retreated to their horses and rode off, their threats echoing in the night. Isaac lowered the rifle but did not relax until the sound of hooves had faded into the distance. Kreshna was shaking, her fear and relief warring for dominance. Isaac turned to her, his expression softening, and pulled her into his arms. "It is all right," he murmured. "They are gone." "They will come back," Kreshna said, her voice breaking. "They will not give up. I should leave, Isaac. I should go far away from here so that you are not caught in the middle of this." "No," Isaac said firmly. "You are not leaving. We will figure this out together." "How?" Kreshna demanded. "How do we fight against men like that? They have numbers and weapons, and they do not care about the law." Isaac pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. "We go to the authorities. We report what happened, and we make sure that Stone and his men are held accountable for their crimes." "And if the authorities do not care," Kreshna asked, "if they see me as property too, then we fight," Isaac said. "But I will not let you go without trying everything else first. You deserve justice, Kreshna, and I will not rest until you have it." His determination steadied her, and she nodded, drawing strength from his resolve. "All right, we will try." The next morning, they traveled to the nearest town with a proper magistrate, a full day's journey south. Isaac carried the rifle and kept a wary eye on the road, but they encountered no trouble. When they arrived, they went directly to the magistrate's office, a small building near the center of town. The magistrate, an older man named Thaddeus Gray, listened to their story with a neutral expression. When Isaac finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is a serious accusation," he said. "Do you have proof that Miss Kreshna was held against her will?" Kreshna pushed up her sleeves, revealing the scars from the shackles that had bound her wrists. "I have the marks of my captivity, and I can describe in detail the place where I was held and the men who held me. If you send someone to investigate, you will find evidence." Thaddeus studied the scars, then nodded slowly. I will send a deputy to look into this. If your claims are substantiated, warrants will be issued for the arrest of Garrett Stone and his associates. In the meantime, I advise you to remain vigilant. Men like Stone do not take kindly to interference. We will, Isaac said. Thank you for your time. They left the office feeling cautiously hopeful. It was not a solution, but it was a start. As they made the long journey back to the homestead, Kreshna found herself thinking about the future for the first time in a long time, not with fear, but with tentative hope. 2 weeks later, a deputy arrived at the homestead with news. Garrett Stone and 3 of his men had been arrested based on evidence found at their operation, a hidden camp deep in the forest where they had held dozens of captives over the years. The remaining men had fled, but warrants had been issued and they would be hunted down. You are safe now, the deputy said. Stone will stand trial, and if he is found guilty, he will hang. Kreshna felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but she did not allow herself to fully relax. She had learned the hard way that safety was a fragile thing, easily shattered. But as the days turned into weeks and no further trouble came, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she truly was free. Autumn arrived, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. The harvest was bountiful, and Isaac and Kreshna worked together to bring in the crops and prepare for the winter. They canned vegetables, smoked meat, and stacked firewood, their movements easy and familiar after months of partnership. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Isaac turned to Kreshna with a serious expression. I have been thinking, he said, about the future and what it might hold for us. Kreshna's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Isaac reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. I know that marriage between our kinds is not common, and that it will bring more trouble than we have already faced, but I do not care about that. I care about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me. He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring. Kreshna, will you marry me? Kreshna stared at the ring, her vision blurring with tears. She had never imagined that someone would want to marry her, that she would be worthy of such a commitment. But Isaac was looking at her with such love and hope that she could not doubt his sincerity. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. Isaac slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, the world awash in the soft light of dusk. The wedding was a simple affair, held at the homestead with only a traveling priest and 2 witnesses from the nearest town who Isaac had befriended. Kreshna wore a dress that had belonged to Isaac's mother, altered to fit her frame, and Isaac wore his best shirt and trousers, freshly cleaned and pressed. They exchanged vows under the open sky, promising to love and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Kreshna felt a joy so profound that it brought her to tears. Isaac kissed her gently, his own eyes shining, and they held each other as the witnesses clapped and offered their congratulations. That night, they celebrated with a simple meal and a bottle of wine that Isaac had been saving for a special occasion. They talked and laughed late into the night, and when they finally retired to bed, Kreshna felt a contentment she had never known. She had been broken, battered, and nearly destroyed, but she had survived. She had found a man who loved her not despite what she was, but because of it. She had found a home, a purpose, and a future. And as she lay in Isaac's arms, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, she smiled. Not the tentative, fragile smile of someone learning to trust again, but the full, radiant smile of someone who had reclaimed her life and her happiness. The world outside might still be harsh and unforgiving, but here in this small corner of it, she was safe, she was loved, and she was free. Winter came and went, and with the return of spring, new life began to stir. Kreshna discovered she was with child in early March, and the news filled both her and Isaac with a mix of joy and trepidation. They did not know what challenges their child might face, born of two worlds that were so often at odds, but they vowed to love and protect them no matter what. The pregnancy was not easy. Kreshna's body, still bearing the scars of her captivity, struggled with the demands of carrying a child. There were days when she was too weak to rise from bed, and Isaac tended to her with a patience and gentleness that made her love him all the more. "You are strong," he would tell her on the hard days. "You have survived worse than this, and you will survive this too." And she did. On a warm day in late October, with the midwife from the nearest town in attendance, Kreshna gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She had her mother's green skin and pointed ears, but her father's gray eyes and delicate features. She was perfect, and when Isaac held her for the first time, he wept openly. "What should we name her?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Kreshna thought for a moment, then smiled. "Hope," she said. "We will call her Hope because that is what she represents. A hope for a better future, where our kinds can live together in peace." Isaac nodded, his gaze never leaving his daughter's face. "Hope Fenton. I think that is perfect." The months that followed were challenging, but filled with a happiness that Kreshna had never imagined possible. Hope was a bright, curious child who smiled often and laughed easily. She was loved fiercely by both her parents, and as she grew, it became clear that she had inherited the best of both their worlds. The people in the nearby town remained wary, but they could not deny the love and care that Isaac and Kreshna showed their daughter. Slowly, attitudes began to shift, if only slightly. A few families who had once been hostile now nodded politely when they passed on the road. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Harrow, even went so far as to gift Hope a small wooden toy on one of their visits to town. It was not much, but it was progress. One spring afternoon, when Hope was nearly 2 years old, a group of travelers arrived at the homestead. They were orcs, a small hunting party from the Iron Peak Mountains, and among them was a face Kreshna had thought she would never see again. Her brother, Thrak. He dismounted from his mount, his expression a mix of shock and disbelief. "Kreshna, is it truly you?" Kreshna stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Thrak, I thought I would never see you again." They embraced fiercely, and Kreshna felt tears streaming down her face. Thrak pulled back, his hands on her shoulders, and studied her face. "We thought you were dead," he said. "When you did not return from the hunt, we searched for weeks, but found no trace. We mourned you, sister." "I was taken," Kreshna said, her voice trembling. "Held captive for 3 years, but I escaped, and I found a new life here." Thrak's gaze moved to Isaac, who stood a respectful distance away with Hope in his arms. His expression hardened. "With a human, with the man who saved my life," Kreshna said firmly. "Isaac is my husband and Hope is our daughter. They are my family, Thrak, and I will not apologize for that." Thrak was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he looked back at Kreshna, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. "Father would not approve." "Father is not here," Kreshna said, "and I have made my choice. I am happy, Thrak, happier than I have been in a long time." "Can you not be glad for me?" Thrak's expression softened slightly, and he sighed. "I do not understand it, but I can see that you are well. That is enough for now." He approached Isaac cautiously, and Isaac shifted Hope to one arm so he could extend his hand. Thrak looked at it for a moment, then clasped it firmly. "You have taken care of my sister," Thrak said. "For that I am grateful." "She is the most important person in my life," Isaac said simply. "I would do anything for her." Thrak nodded, then turned back to Kreshna. "I will tell the clan that you live, and that you have found peace. I do not know if they will accept your choice, but I will speak for you if they do not." "Thank you," Kreshna said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more to me than you know." Thrak and his party stayed for 2 days, during which Kreshna caught up on news of her family and clan. Her parents were alive and well, though they had aged greatly in her absence. Her siblings had all started families of their own, and her clan remained strong despite the challenges of life in the mountains. When it came time for them to leave, Thrak pulled Kreshna aside. "If you ever wish to return, you would be welcome," he said. "The clan may not understand, but they would not turn you away." Kreshna smiled and shook her head. "This is my home now, Thrak, but I am glad to know that the door is open should I ever need it." They embraced one last time, and then Thrak and his party rode off, disappearing into the forest. Kreshna watched them go, feeling a sense of closure she had not known she needed. That evening, as she and Isaac sat on the porch with Hope playing at their feet, Kreshna reflected on how far she had come. 3 years ago, she had been a broken, terrified girl, convinced that she would never know happiness again. Now she was a wife, a mother, and a woman who had reclaimed her life from the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I was thinking about how lucky I am," Kreshna said. "To have found you, to have this life. I never thought I would be able to smile again, let alone laugh, let alone love. But you gave me all of that, Isaac. You gave me everything." Isaac kissed her temple, his touch gentle. "You gave me just as much, Kreshna. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep going despite it. You taught me that love can bridge any divide if both people are willing to fight for it. And you gave me a family, something I never thought I would have." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set over the fields they had planted together. Hope toddled over and climbed into Kreshna's lap, her small hands reaching up to pat her mother's face. Kreshna smiled down at her daughter, her heart full to bursting. She had been captive once, but no more. She had been broken once, but she had healed. And she had learned, slowly and painfully, to smile again, not just at Isaac's kitchen table, but at the life they had built together, brick by brick, day by day. A life filled with love, hope, and the promise of a better tomorrow. And that was more than enough.